became a spiritual disaster because it began to lead the people away from God, and it reached very long-reaching consequences for him and for the people. False worship leads us to break our relationship with God. It may sound good, it may look good, it may even feel good. But if it's false, it's not good. What a beautiful day yesterday and today, right? It was awesome yesterday. Got to work outside a little bit, which was great. Feeling it today, though, which is fine. Reminds me that I am alive, and God gives me the ability to do things, which is awesome. You know, throughout our lives, we find ourselves at crossroads. We find ourselves at places where we have to make a decision. Are we going to go to the left, or are we going to go to the right? Or sometimes there's three. There's the middle road that we could take. Maybe, the decision we have to make is because we need to fit in, or we make a decision because we want to avoid conflict, or sometimes it's just to make our lives go a little bit smoother. So we make this decision. And sometimes we make a decision and we end up having to compromise what we believe to be true, our convictions, just to keep things together. But here's the truth. This thing that we have to do, these decisions we have to make, is not just a modern idea. It's not just something that happens in the modern world. This is something that is as old as society, old as humanity itself. And it's woven throughout Scripture. You see place after place where people are having to make decisions about things in their lives, and sometimes they make the right decision, and sometimes they compromise. So today we're going to dig into a very dramatic story of Jeroboam. I hope so far we've talked about Solomon, and we've talked about Rehoboam, and now we're going to talk about Jeroboam. So we're going to be, in this series, we're going to be talking about the kings of the two nations of Israel, actually Judah and Israel. The southern kingdom, which was Judah and Benjamin, and the northern, which was the other 10 tribes. And we know last week we saw that Rehoboam, in his foolishness, ended up splitting the nation, fulfilling a prophecy and a promise that God had made to Jeroboam. Jeroboam's life started out, as most lives do, pretty normal. And as he grew and became an adult, he ends up being a head of the labor for Solomon. And in the process, he ends up on the bad side of Solomon. So he flees to Egypt. So now he is a political prisoner in Egypt. And then once Solomon dies and Rehoboam comes to power, he comes back. And because of Rehoboam's foolishness, Jeroboam becomes king of the 10 northern tribes of Israel. God has given Jeroboam a golden opportunity. He is standing at that crossroads. Will he make the right choice? Says, there's always more than one choice to make in life. Or is he going to make the wrong choice? Will his kingdom be built upon faith in Yahweh, anchored in the promises that God had given the Israelites? Or will it go another direction? Unfortunately for Jeroboam, fear and uncertainty begins to creep in to his life. Faced with this uncertainty, Jeroboam begins to make a series of choices that he believes are the right choices for him and for Israel, because he wants to save his power. He wants to secure his power. So he begins to make some shortcuts. And instead of trusting God's way, he decides to invent some new ways. New ways that are more convenient for the people, he states. More likely, more convenient for him. A very much more convenient religion. Because remember, where was Jerusalem? Jerusalem was in the southern kingdom. It was in Judah. So people in the northern kingdom, in order to worship Yahweh, what did they have to do? They had to go to Jerusalem. And he's thinking, if they keep going to Jerusalem, I'm going to have a problem. So I'm going to solve that problem. It would be much more convenient if they could worship here. It would be more popular. And would be safer. What began as a very clever and political move is actually going to have far-reaching consequences. It's going to create a spiritual catastrophe in the northern kingdoms, sending the nation down a path of idolatry that ultimately ends up with them being taken into captivity by the Assyrian Empire. So as we unpack Jeroboam's story today, we'll discover that compromising our faith, even when it seems like it's a good idea or it's a good reason, it's going to lead us away from what God says is best. We're also going to see that this ancient account points to the very fact that there's only one true king, and what it really means to worship that king in spirit and truth. So I invite you, open your heart. Let's open the Bible. Let's ask ourselves, are there places in our lives where we have taken our own way instead of taking God's way? What does it look like for us right now to return to true worship? So open your Bibles to 1 Kings chapter 12. And we're going to start with verse 25. Then Jeroboam built Shechem in the hill country of Ephraim, and lived there. And he went out from there and built Penuel. And Jeroboam said in his heart, now the kingdom will turn back to the house of David, if this people go up to offer sacrifices in the temple of the Lord at Jerusalem. Then the heart of his people will turn again to their Lord, to Rehoboam, king of Judah, and they will kill me and return to Rehoboam, king of Judah. So you see his doubt. You see his fear. If the people of Israel go and worship in Jerusalem, which is where they're supposed to worship, we'll talk about that. If they go, they're going to turn back to God, to the Lord, to Yahweh, but they're also going to turn back to Rehoboam, and they will kill me. I'll lose my kingdom. So what does he do? He first builds Shechem. Shechem, remember we talked about that a little bit last week. This was a very important place. It was right close to the border between Israel, the northern kingdom, and Judah, the southern kingdom. So he does this to try to secure his kingdom, to fortify the city in the hill country of Ephraim. And he builds Penuel, which is located on the east side of the Jordan River. Now, understand, he's not just randomly picking towns that he wants to build. There is very much some spiritual and historical significance to both of these towns. We talked a little bit about Shechem, and we will tell a little bit more here in a moment. But these places are loaded with significant spiritual, historical, and strategic place meanings to them. Remember, Shechem was a place that Abraham first built an altar to Yahweh when he entered the promised land from the north, when he came over from Mesopotamia. This is where Joshua renewed the covenant. Jeroboam's decision to first place his capital here was a deliberate move to really tap into a rich heritage that the Jewish people had and establish a political and spiritual center that would rival Jerusalem. That was his point. But there's a problem. Shechem is a Levitical city, which means it was a place of refuge. This was a place where if you hurt somebody, let's say you accidentally killed somebody, it happens, and you could run to these cities and the family could not take vengeance on you. You'd stay in that city until the high priest died, and then you were released and the families couldn't touch you. It was a place of refuge, a place of safety. but it was a place where the Levites were. There was one of the towns that was given to the Levites by God out of all the tribes, because the Levites did not have land of their own, so they were given cities. But it was a place where there were a lot of priests, a lot of Levites who were loyal to Yahweh. So Jeroboam realizes he's got a problem there. He wants to set up his own religious system. He doesn't want the people going to Jerusalem. So his time in Shechem was very short-lived. He soon decides he wants to split up his spiritual influence over the nation into two places. One of them is Bethel, and the other one is in Dan. Bethel in the south, Dan in the north. He also created this, he rebuilt this place called Penuel. Well, what's Penuel? Penuel was on the east side of the Jordan River, and it had its own kind of spiritual history. This was where Jacob wrestled with God. Kind of interesting. He sets up this town where Jacob wrestled with God, and we know that Jeroboam is going to wrestle with God also. But not physically like Jacob did. And this is where Jacob got the name Israel. In that place, God changed his name from Jacob, which means basically scoundrel, cheater, to Israel, which means struggles with God. Did you know that that's what Israel means in Hebrew? It means struggles with God. We know that because El, especially, El is the name for God. Israel struggles with God. And Israel has struggled with God since the beginning. And they continue to struggle with God. Again, Jeroboam's not just doing this to strengthen his position physically. It's not about the brick and mortar. It was kind of to bolster the legitimacy of his reign. He's going to historical spots and rebuilding them to try to get the people to kind of look to him more than looking to Jerusalem. He reaches back into Israel's history to try to get the people to stay loyal to him. But we're going to see this very political calculation and these things he thinks he does that are based upon fear is going to set the stage for a very, very dangerous compromise. Because see, Jeroboam forgot something. He forgot many things, but one of the things he forgot is what Solomon wrote in Proverbs 29:25. It says, "The fear of man lays a snare, but whoever trusts in the Lord is safe." See, if Jeroboam, instead of being fearful and coming up with his own ideas on what he needed to do, if he had trusted God, he would have been safe. His efforts to secure his kingdom by human means are ultimately going to lead to him trusting less in God and more in himself, which opens the door to false worship and a decline in the spirituality. And we're going to see this as we go forward, as we go through all the kings of the northern kingdom. The first thing that begins to happen is false worship. Look at 1 Kings 12, verses 28 to 30. Here's what it says. It says, "So the king took counsel. He brought people around him to give him ideas," which sometimes is a good thing. As we saw with Rehoboam, and now we see with Jeroboam, who you listen to does matter. So the king took counsel and made 2 calves of gold. And he said to the people, "You have gone up to Jerusalem long enough. Behold your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt." And he set one in Bethel, and the other he put in Dan. Then this thing became a sin, for the people went as far as Dan to be before one. In his fear of losing grip on the northern kingdoms, he sets up 2 places of worship. Not 2 places of worship to Yahweh. 2 places of worship to a golden calf. This is going to change the spiritual direction of Israel for generations. Instead of trusting the promises of God, he set up these 2 calves and he trusted in his own ideas. One in Bethel, which is the southern gateway into the kingdom, and one in Dan, which is farther north. By the way, Dan is in a place, a very bad place. Throughout Israeli history, this was a place where many times evil was considered. It was a place of treachery. This is the place where Jesus goes to the top of Mount Hermon, is believed. That's where Mount Hermon is. And where he meets with Elijah and Moses. When he comes down and he says, upon this rock I'll build my church and the gates of hell shall not overcome it. There's a place there, it's a grotto, and it was a temple to Pan. And it's a place in the ground where steam comes up. And he's talking about the gates of hell right there. This is a place of very much spiritual warfare constantly going on in this place. It wasn't a place you went to vacation. It wasn't. It was a place many Israelites who were righteous avoided. But he sets up these things, these temples with these gods, these false gods. And what's interesting in what he said, look what he said. He says to them, "Behold your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt." Where have we heard that before? We heard that back at Sinai. When Moses is on top of the mountain, they convinced Aaron, his brother, to melt down the gold and to make a golden calf. And he says, "Behold, Israel, your gods, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt." Again,